Welcome everyone, and, well, with it being the season, I'm gonna do some r/no sleep readings, but with a theme of Christmas going on. This one, titled, I Come from a Small Mountain Village Where No One Dares Speak During Christmas. I hope you enjoy. People often ask me, Theodore, what the hell happened to your hands? I always tell them the same fabricated story. It was an accident from my reckless youth, a split-second lapse in judgment and some jagged broken glass. All in all, it could have been much worse. I honestly don't remember seeing people being so direct with others in the past. Normally seeing an injury or disfigurement might lead people to stare but not outright questioning. At least not from adults. Maybe it's my easygoing personality that makes people comfortable enough to ask, I don't know. All I know is that it's much safer for everybody if they never find out the horrible truth about my injury. And yet I just can't keep it bottled up inside any longer. I made a vow with the rest of the village that I would keep silent. I don't plan on betraying their trust, but I have to get part of the story out. Maybe it's just the fact that Christmas is here again. Maybe I'm just tired of living in fear. I think if I keep my village's name and country out of this, then everyone will be safe. Alright, here it goes. I was born in a small, snowy mountain village somewhere up north. I don't want to say the name of the town or country for reasons that will become clear later. Suffice it to say that it is incredibly beautiful and idyllic, especially during Christmas time. It's a veritable winter wonderland. I always fucking hated it with every fiber of my being. Why exactly? Depression, I suppose. When I was 16, I suddenly became an orphan and lived alone in the older house that my parents owned. After their death, the village looked after me the best they could. Better than I deserved, really. Several of the families even tried to adopt me, but I just couldn't leave the house that I grew up in. I carried that resentment with me all the way to my late 20s. It was always there, simmering just beneath the surface. Because of it, I grew to despise everything around me. I hated the other villagers in my town. They were like dumb sheep, oblivious to the real world that I was unfortunate to witness to. I saw how things really worked. They were blind to it. Of course, I knew logically there was nothing wrong with these people. It was the depression skewing my perception. So, that's why, 5 years ago, I decided to put my resentment of the town aside and join them at the Christmas market, where they always had their big Christmas Eve banquet. I recall it was especially cold that evening. Large puffs of icy, foggy breath would materialize constantly throughout the market anytime someone would laugh and cheer, which they constantly did, completely unaware of the horrors that were about to unfold. I still see their faces in my dreams almost every night. Their happy and carefree faces before their injuries like mine and their enforced stoic demeanor. If I only could have somehow warned them. That night the northern lights were especially bright. Something about them just didn't look right. They were almost otherworldly. Like something was happening that we humans just couldn't understand. That is probably when everything actually happened. The catalytic event that propelled my village into a winter of sorrow. Here, Theodore, this is for you. Even though we don't see you very often, we love you and wish you a Merry Christmas. She said to me. It was Ingrid's daughter, Merritt, who was only 5. She was holding out a small present and was offering it up to me. I couldn't believe my eyes after all the horrible things I had said about my village and all my despicable behavior. I still thought fondly of me as a member of the town. Merritt, that is so thoughtful. Thank you so much. I love you all, I said to her. Immediately at that moment, my depression seemed to vanish, and I smiled uncontrollably. I could feel an icy tear go down my cheek, and I thought that at the moment, everything would be all right with the world. My heart was full of joy. Merritt, sweetheart, here, take my gloves. It's too cold for you to be outside without your gloves on, dear, elderly Mr. Hanson said to the giggling girl. Mr. Hanson was about to hand his gloves to the energetic child and then suddenly locked eyes with mine. His expression grew strange. It wasn't unpleasant. More like pleasantly surprised in a confused way. At what, though, I'll never know. It was at that very moment that it happened. His chest exploded. At least that's the best way I can describe it. There was a loud clap, and then Mr. Hanson collapsed. Now, I come from a country with a very low gun violence. However, even in my country, it isn't completely unheard of. The first thing I think to check is the bell tower that was adjacent to the town square, somehow deep in my gut. I knew something must have been coming from that bell tower. I immediately crouched down next to a stall selling traditional pastries. It obscured the view of the tower, so at least I wouldn't be seen. I look out towards the open square, and people were starting to look around, curious as to what happened and why Mr. Hanson was laying face up in the middle of the ground. A few villagers looked at me, and I didn't know what to do. My adrenaline had kicked in, and my heart felt strange. It was racing like it never had before. What could I do at that moment? I pointed up towards the direction of the bell tower. That's when the screams started. It was a few at first, but then the panic set in. Everyone was trapped in the middle of the expansive plaza with precious few spots for cover. "No, honey, I have to go check on him," the town doctor, Mr. Jimenez, said. He ran over selflessly to check on the elderly and, at least to my vantage point, obviously dead, Mr. Hanson. Mr. Jimenez didn't have any time to react. The same exact thing that happened to poor Mr. Hanson befell Dr. Jimenez. The same exact wound. A few people made it to the town hall building way on the other side of the square. However, most just clapped in fear, seeking refuge in scattered hiding spots that would hide them from the ominous killing bell tower. Screaming and crying lasted for a bit, but eventually died down. The only noise that could be heard was a slightly off-key recording of Christmas carols that were being played on loop on the speaker system. A few more screams occasionally, with people collapsing. I couldn't see why or how, but more people died, just like Mr. Hanson and Dr. Jimenez. This was around 11 p.m., and that's when the next horrifying stage of the night took place. Several of us tried to call for help, but the inclement weather was messing with their cell service. We tried and tried again to call, but no communication could make it out of town. Some even tried to yell up to the bell tower to reason with the unknown assailant, but no response ever came back. The cold crept into every part of my body. I shivered constantly through the night while I cracked several teeth in their uncontrollable chattering. My light clothing was meant for a quick dinner, not an overnight stay in a below-freezing Christmas market. It was 3:17 a.m. on the dot when I noticed Elias staring at me. Elias was an engineer and easily known as the smartest person in the entire village. He was hiding beside a group of trash and recycling containers about 30 meters or so away from my position. Steely blue eyes were staring daggers into mine. First, I thought he believed that maybe I had something to do with all this. Then it looked more like he was debating something internally in his mind. Eventually, he smiled slightly and took a deep breath and exhaled, the condensation billowing from his mouth. Then he stood up. He didn't say a single word. I yelled and pleaded him to get down, but he didn't budge. He stood there stoically and checked his watch. Others started to shout at him to duck as well, but he continued to look at his wristwatch. Then he looked back at me and smiled again. "Listen, everyone, do not say or do anything for the rest of the night. It looks as if..." And that's when it happened to Elias as well. The same wound in the same spot in his chest materialized, and then collapsed unceremoniously in the icy village plaza. My hands were freezing. Shit, I'd never been so cold in my entire life. The tips of my fingers were a strange color, and I just couldn't get them warm. I could hear wailing and sobs peppered through the scattered stalls and tables. No one dared move for the rest of the night. Eventually, several men and I decided to run towards the death-bringing bell tower. Whoever, whatever was up there would eventually have to rest. Now was our chance, we thought. Me and a few other men all sprinted towards the tower in silence. When we made it to the front doors, we found them locked from the outside with a combination lock. It seemed to be the one that was always adorning it to keep people out. None of us who made it to the tower knew the actual combination, so we broke the lock off with a large stone. We checked the ground floor, but it was completely empty. Nothing was stirring there, so we trekked slowly and cautiously up the stairwell that led to the top of the belfry. It was empty. There was no one there. We searched everywhere, but it looked like no one had gone up there in ages. Everything was covered in dust. That Christmas day, everyone remained quiet. No one dared utter a single word. Everyone took assessment of the dead and the injured. All the injuries of the living were frostbite. Some had it bad, taking their ears and noses, thankfully. Mine just got the fingertips. In the coming days after that night, people eventually started to speak. We mourned the dead and cleaned up the square. Everyone discussed what they thought had happened. Was it related to the Aurora Borealis? What on earth could have caused such a catastrophic bloodbath in our quiet, snowy village? Eventually, the town council decided that it was best to keep everything quiet. The importance of keeping outsiders away and safe was deemed the ideal solution. I can't say that I agree with it, but these are good people, so I went along with it. Every Christmas Eve and Christmas Day since that fateful night, the town doesn't celebrate Christmas at all. Festivities no longer fill the town square, and there's no more singing or laughing or exchanging of thoughtful presents. No one's been killed since. Anyway, that's my story of what happened in my village. They call Christmas Eve the Silent Night from now on, for obvious reasons. I moved away a few years ago, but I kept the promise not to mention this to anyone. Now here I am, spewing my heart out to everyone on Reddit. I meant to keep this shorter, but once I started going, it grew about 3 times larger than I anticipated. So be safe and have happy holidays.